We gonna kill every last one of you.
Sinners is the latest movie from director Ryan Coogler, who before this has done things like Black Panther and Creed. This film, I would say, is enjoyable, thought-provoking, slightly flawed, but despite wearing a lot of its influences on its sleeve, I would say is still quite original.
I think I shat myself.
So let's start off with the story. It's about two brothers, the Smokestack twins, who, after making their money in Chicago working with Al Capone, have come back to their hometown to open up a juke joint, which is like a music bar. They enlist the help of their cousin Sammy, who is a blues guitar player, as well as a group of farmers, shopkeepers, and ex-girlfriends in a ragtag team of people. And it seems like we're settling in for a historical drama. Then the vampires show up, and the whole film completely turns on its head. So, speaking about those influences, I know I'm not the first to say this, but this plot is obviously very reminiscent of From Dusk Till Dawn, which similarly has two brothers who are criminals, who run into a group of people, and that ragtag group end up in a kind of an old bar out of the way in the middle of nowhere, and then vampires show up, and the movie becomes completely different. Other influences that people will have noticed probably are things like John Carpenter's The Thing, particularly in scenes like when Cornbread, who is one of the farmers, they get to be a bouncer, comes, he is turned into a vampire, and then when he is trying to get let in, he wants to be invited in, he's trying to convince them that he's fine, and it's very unnerving because despite looking like him and sounding like him, it's just ever so slightly off. And then similarly, later on, when they're testing each other to see if anyone has been turned, they all eat a bulb of garlic, and it's very reminiscent of the scene in The Thing where they go around testing the blood to see if anyone has been infected or replaced by the Thing. Depending on what way you look at it, these influences, you could say, are just homages or kind of, allusions to films that Ryan Coogler is inspired by or really likes. But part of me thinks they were used kind of specifically because because these elements are recognizable to audiences today because of those films, that they are almost used like a shorthand to kind of let the audience know, right, this is the kind of film it is, this is what we're doing, and we're ticking these things off ticking these boxes off the list so that we can get to what the film is really about and spend more time on that.
Will somebody take me in your eyes?
The standout scene from the film has to be when Sammy begins to play guitar at the juke joint for the first time, and we get this amazing visual representation of this idea that music that is connected to a particular culture runs in a kind of a through line that extends to the past and the future. And we see this represented by Sammy playing his music there in what is the film's present, and then the camera pans around, and then we see next to him is someone playing electric guitar wearing a kind of a spandex disco outfit that's clearly from decades into the future. Then pan around again, and we have someone in tribal gear playing on drums from the past, and then we start to see other elements of hip hop and blues and rap music, and I think it just really illustrates this kind of idea that, yeah, as the film says, that the music and culture like that has a kind of a through line that is very connective and very present to the people listening to it. You can feel the influences of what have come before, but maybe also feel vague allusions to the kind of things that could come from it. Now, obviously, another kind of thing or another theme that is in this film a lot is the idea of kind of culture and African American culture, and that's a whole other layer. And obviously, I'm not very qualified to speak on that, but I acknowledge that it's there. One thing I could speak to a bit more maybe is the vampires and their culture, because they seem to be based in kind of Irish culture and Irish music. And there's been people talking about that over here and kind of making jokes about us being the bad guys and stuff. But I would kind of challenge that because number one, I would say, are the vampires bad guys in this film? I don't, not really. They are antagonists in the sense that they have goals that kind of run contrary to our protagonists. But realistically, I think they believe what they're selling. They want to turn people because if you get turned into a vampire, there's no disease, there's no death, there's no racism, and there's a better sense of community. And if you join in, you get to be part of this. And I think they really do believe that. And we kind of see when Smoke's girlfriend goes down in the fight and Smoke has to kill her before she can be turned. The vampire Stack and his girlfriend Mary seem genuinely distraught that she's dead and she can't become, she can't come with them. And obviously later on in the kind of after credit scene, we kind of get more of this idea as well. So I don't know if they're necessarily bad guys. They're just people with a different agenda who really do believe they're doing what's best, which from director Ryan Coogler, have you seen Black Panther, is what a lot of people said about that at the time. Michael B. Jordan's character, he was the antagonist, but he wasn't really wrong, or the things he was saying were right. It was maybe just the way he was going about it was, not the best way. But the Irish people as well, another reason I kind of, I don't know, I really like their inclusion, is because what I recognize in it is that if it was simply a case of, black music and white music, you could get white music. But the element of culture and where it comes from and that through line, if you took white music from America, a lot of that would eventually lead you back to the African American music. If you think of someone like Elvis, who inspired so many white musicians, if you were to be generous, you could say he was heavily influenced by African American music. So that through line wouldn't run the same way. But what I see in Ryan Coogler picking Irish people is that he's recognizing this as a kind of its own thing, as a parallel running culture with its own tradition of music and culture, and that two kind of equal and opposite branches of the same idea, that the music that these vampires are playing is no less kind of valid and no less steeped in a culture and a background than the music that Sammy is playing, and that it's like recognizing like. So I actually took that as a kind of as a nod of recognition from Ryan Coogler, as this is a culture of music unique to white people that is their own and not kind of influenced or stolen or borrowed from anyone else necessarily.
What the hell going on?
Oh, we heard tale of a party.
We have this mid-credit scene where we flash to the future. It's now the 1990s, and Sammy has grown, into an old man, musician. On the back wall behind him, I don't know if you noticed, but it says Pearline, which is the woman's name who he found her button that night, and so that's the name of his band or his club or whatever. And as he's sitting at the bar after one of his gigs, Stack and Mary show up, looking, as youthful as they did all those years ago, and they just kind of have a really lovely conversation with him. They kind of, he says, "Oh, I got all your records, but I miss hearing the old stuff," and he plays a song for them, and they just kind of have this really nice conversation about, obviously before all the vampire stuff, how for both of them it was, one of the best days of their life because Sammy got to be free. That's another element, I suppose, in it as well, which is interesting, is because the film is kind of bookended, or partly bookended by Sammy arrives at the church with the guitar in hand after everything had happened, and his father, who's a preacher, tells him to, give up the guitar because look what it's led to, and then when the film when the film was over, then we see the end of that, and we see that he decided to keep the guitar despite everything that happened. He wasn't going to get rid of it, and this kind of plays into this idea that about life affirmation, that despite all the the bad things. You know, Sammy, he could have put the guitar down and could have lived the rest of his life in fear of what may come, but decided instead to enjoy whatever kind of life he had, doing what he loved, and that was playing music for him. And there just seems to be that kind of element, or that kind of theme in that. And Michael B. Jordan says, before he got turned into a vampire, it was the best day of his life because he was, he got to see the sun, he got to see his brother alive, and he just really seems really resentful and remorseful for that time kind of passing. And you get the sense that if he could go back, he really would, which again speaks to this idea that there is still an element of him inside. And like that, when he shows up, he offers to turn Sammy because he says, "Oh, you've not got long left," and Sammy says, "No thanks," and he just respects it. So that kind of plays into this idea, I think, of they're not bad guys; they're just people with a different journey, a different path, and that doesn't mean their search for happiness and fulfillment is any less valid than anyone else's, which, as the film kind of deals with race and culture, I think, is definitely on purpose. And it's probably it's probably the most important scene for explaining what the film is about. And it comes like midway through the credits, which is very strange. It's strange, but not in a bad way. It's just a very interesting way to kind of structure it like that. So yeah, that's pretty much an overall kind of view of the film. It was really good. Really enjoyed it. Would definitely recommend it. But now let's get into the nitty gritty. Some of the things that stood out to me as kind of weird. And I was going to say up front, I'm not complaining about these things, and I'm not necessarily saying these are criticisms. They're just things I noticed, and maybe you noticed them as well. So yeah, the film opens with an animated sequence that explains this idea that really good music that kind of comes from the soul and is tied to culture can break the bounds of time and space, and kind of blur those lines between past, present, and future. When we get to the juke joint and Sammy starts playing his music, and right before we get into that kind of scene, we hear a clip of that same voiceover repeated again. Now, I thought this was a little strange because, it's about showing, not telling. And I just thought it was weird that they, right before they were about to show you in this amazing, inspired scene, this kind of really original take on music and culture, that they would just like preempt it by explaining it one more time. And I just wondered, was that an intentional choice by the director, or was that a studio thing that they kind of went, audiences might not get it, they might go, be too confused. Let's just give them an extra little reminder. And these things happen. Blade Runner is probably the most famous example of, a studio saying people aren't going to get this, and they make them add in a voiceover that explains everything. So I just thought that stuck out to me as being a bit strange. And you know what, like, even that, because there's nothing else animated in the film, that first animated sequence, the more I thought about it, I wondered, was all of that, studio added in kind of after the fact because they thought people wouldn't get it. If there was none of that, if they didn't explain this concept in words, I think I probably would have got it through the visuals if they didn't do it at all. But even if they only had it at the start, I definitely would have got it without the repetition. So I just thought that was strange. Similarly to that, there's a scene later on where the kind of witch woman is explaining to Smoke that she doesn't want to, if she goes down in the fight, take her out before they have a chance to turn her. Because she just wants to die. And he's like, "Oh, I don't know about that." And she goes, "I have someone waiting for me on the other side." And then it cuts to a clip from earlier where they show the baby's gravestone. And again, I thought, yeah, I know. Like, obviously she's talking about her baby. It was just weird. I just kind of, like, I just felt like saying, I'm paying attention. I promise you, I'm paying attention to the film. You don't have to keep reminding me of these things. And I just thought that was slightly yeah, it was just strange. And again, I wondered, was that an intentional thing, or was that because it would be so easy to just take that clip that was already in the film earlier and just pop it there. So it was weird. Another thing was, so the scene where they eat the garlic, and this, I suppose, depends on what way you look at it, because if, as I said, if the point of that scene was just a kind of a shorthand way to kind of tick that box and say, look, no one in here is a vampire, we just need to get that out of the way so we can move on, then I guess it's fine. But the way it was paced was kind of strange, because it comes about, they find a body that appears to have been bitten by a vampire, it's in a pool of blood, they throw him out, and then they need to decide was anyone inside a vampire. Turns out he wasn't bitten, no one is a vampire, and it's fine. But the problem is, in between them finding the body and doing the test, they throw him outside, and the vampires are having a dance party. They do Irish dancing, and they sing The Rocky Road to Dublin. It's a great scene, but it breaks up those two events too much, I think, because then, and when, after I seen the film, I was talking about it to my girlfriend, and I mentioned this, and she said, yeah, that was weird. Like, I thought that was weird that they just started testing each other out of nowhere. And I said, no, I can remember they found that body before, and then the dance. And she went, oh yeah, yeah, I forgot about that. And look, I know I was saying, about seeding things earlier, you don't have to keep reminding the audience, but I feel like there's a difference between mentioning that there's a dead, that the child has died at the start, and then her referencing that again to, this feels like a connected sequence of events, that you find the body, you do the test, to put something in the middle. I think the pacing of it just feels a bit odd, and it kind of robs it of any sense of suspense. But then again, as I said, maybe he wasn't going for suspense. Maybe he kind of went, look, we're not going to muck around and spend too much time on this, because no one is a vampire. We just got to get this out of the way. Another strange thing was the introduction of the Native Americans, because towards the kind of start of the second act of the film, the Native Americans show up because they're chasing after the main vampire, and he hides in the cabin, and they say, hey, we're looking for this guy, he's pretty dangerous. Have you seen him? No. I mean, they're like pretty sure he's in there, but at the same time they kind of go, not our problem. It's getting late, it's time to clock off. Right, pick this up again tomorrow. And they leave. And, in film parlance, there's the idea of Chekhov's gun. If you introduce a loaded gun into a film, by the end of the film you would expect to see that gun be fired. And similarly, I think if you introduce a group of vampire hunting Native Americans into this film, I think there's a reasonable expectation that they would show up again in some capacity. So I just thought it was very surprising when they didn't. And I got to the end of the film and I kind of went, oh yeah, whatever happened to those guys? They literally just went, yep, not our problem, And another strange thing was the to do with the clan. So the Ku Klux Klan were the owners of the barn. They sold it to the Smokestack brothers, and they gave them the money, and kind of said, if we see any of your clan friends around, we're going to come and we'll kill you. And they said, oh, no, don't worry about that. It turns out that they were planning to come back and kill them, and I think there's kind of like this idea that they do this a lot. They sell it to black people, take all their money, and then kill them, sell it to someone else. So the vampires say this, we got their memories, so we know the clan is going to come, we can help you with that. But the clan shows up the next morning, and this is the part that is kind of weird, is why would they show up the following morning, like the morning after opening night? Because presumably they want to kill the owners, and they might be there, but, if no vampires had shown up and the night went well, presumably, I don't know, around like 3 or 4 in the morning, everyone gets sent home, brothers count up their money, and I don't know, would they sleep there? Would they go somewhere else? Would they head into town to get some supplies? It's just, I feel like, why would you go with all your friends to kill the new owners of the barn when they might be there? Wouldn't you go that night when they'll definitely be there, as well as all the other people who presumably you don't like and want to kill her there also, and you get all of them. And as I said, it's kind of, it's a strange It's strange, but I think it also speaks to the kind of film it is. Because if this was From Dusk Till Dawn, I think you would have had the vampires show up at night, the clan shows up that night, the Native American vampire hunters show up that night, and then we have all four groups, fighting against each other, fighting for each other. They're all going at it. It's a big, crazy action scene massacre. But it's not that kind of film. So I think, as I said, I'm not necessarily saying these things are criticisms. They're just things that, as I was watching, I went, that's a bit strange. That's a bit strange. But I will say, although we've gone on about them a lot, there's nothing there that detracted from my enjoyment. There was nothing there that I kind of went, well, that's too big of a plot hole. I simply can't abide by that. Despite all those things, and maybe even because of all those things, as John Legend said, all those perfect imperfections, it's what makes the film kind of feel a bit more original. It's not just a by the numbers film. There feels like real thought and artistry behind it, and when you get that, sometimes you get things that aren't perfect. It has kind of rougher edges, but I think that's what makes a film more appealing and more interesting.
Love to